The following clip is from the North to South Show, live every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where we talk SEC football everything. Now, we'd love to have you out for next show, but for now, hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this clip. Moving on now from talking about the SEC West, and we just went through Auburn and TJ Finley. Now I want to talk some SEC East football because the SEC East, I feel like so far, out of all the videos I've done, I've definitely tended more towards doing West content. I mean, I've done some Gamecock things. I've done some things on Tennessee. I've done a couple things on Georgia and Florida. But mainly, I look at a bunch of content that I've done for like LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas A&M, a bunch of schools like that. Because I think the SEC West is stronger this year. But what I want to talk about here, and it's not really scripted or anything, I just want to talk off the top of my head about how I feel about how open the SEC East is this season and how open that second spot in the SEC East is this season. I don't think that there's any problem, at least for me, coming out and saying that I think Georgia is the best team in the SEC East, and it's their division to lose 110%. I mean, JT Daniels is looking like he's going to have a great season this year. I think Georgia has one of the better running back rooms in the country. Their O-line always performs well. Yes, you go down George Pickens in the receiving game, but I still think that receiving core still has a lot of talent on there. And then you look defensively, one of the better defensive lines in all the nation. I think the secondary will be there. The linebackers will be there. And you just look at the talent gap and everything from Georgia to the rest of the SEC teams. I think Georgia's got this division locked up. But anything could happen. Any of these teams could jump up and be first. Anything can happen. But I want to talk about assuming that, let's say, Georgia does do what they're expected to do and win the SEC East. I want to talk about this second place because I think that there's definitely a favorite for SEC East second team, and that's obviously going to be Florida, obviously the SEC East champions from last season. But as much as everyone wants to think that Florida is, and as much as I do think that Florida is still underrated for what the drop-off, we all know the drop-off from last season, it was bad. They lost a lot of talent. You lose your Heisman finalist quarterback. You lose the second best player in all of the drafting, Kyle Pitts. You lose Kadarius Toney. You lose Grimes. You lose a couple guys defensively. But I still think that this Florida team has tons of talent. You look at the secondary, I look at Elam being one of the better cornerbacks in all of the nation there. I think Emory Jones goes in and has a successful year at Florida. I look at the running back position, DeMarcus Bowman going in for Florida, big transfer from Clemson. Justin Shorter in the receiving game, Zippier in the receiving game. I still see a lot of talent all around this team for Florida. But let's say Florida isn't that second team. Let's say Florida is playing more competitive games against teams like Kentucky or teams like Missouri or teams like South Carolina or teams like Tennessee, maybe even throwing Vanderbilt there. I want to talk about this second place team. Let's start off with talking about Kentucky because Kentucky, historically for me, is the team that I'm naturally harsh on. And I come out there and I admit that in all of my videos. Anytime I talk about Kentucky and Kentucky fans have been very, very respectful and appreciative that I do come out and admit that there is some bias, at least for me, when I talk about Kentucky. All in all, I think that Kentucky still has a chance, and even though I talk harsh on them, and even though every single season I still think my Gamecocks have Kentucky wrapped up, I'm always proven wrong, and Kentucky's always usually in the top half of the SEC East each and every season. I'm pretty sure Joey Gatewood is going to be going in as your quarterback this season. You're also going to have Levis transferring in from Penn State. But all in all, Chris Rodriguez in the running back game, he's one of the better running backs in the SEC. And I think defensively, Kentucky is always able to put up a really, really good defensive performance each and every single season. I don't know what else to say about Kentucky. I always go into the season on them low, and they always finish out higher than what I expect. So I think Kentucky, if they are able to be competitive with Florida this season and maybe get a big win somewhere else, I'm not saying that they upset Georgia, but beat out the rest of the SEC East, maybe get out a big win against Ole Miss this season, which I'm pretty sure, do they play them this season? No, Kentucky plays Mississippi State. They're their SEC West opponent, and I'm not sure who else Kentucky plays this season, but I think Kentucky, if they just go out and run the table against some of the weaker SEC East teams, this is definitely a team that you could see second place. Now I want to talk about Missouri, because Missouri is a team that I might think that they're my most underrated team in all of the SEC this season, just from a standpoint of people don't talk about them. They don't get the media attention that, let's say, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Georgia, Florida, all those teams get. But Missouri last season, I thought did really well. Obviously, you're going to lose your best player from last season, Nick Bolton, but you look at the offensive side of the ball, I really like what they got going over there. Connor Baszlik returns at quarterback, was one of the better freshmen in all of college football last season. You look at the running game, you look at Batty, and then you look at the receiving game. I look at guys like Chisholm out there and Knox out there. I think Missouri, defensively, there still could be some additions to that. Obviously, losing Nick Bolton will be a huge piece, and they were inconsistent some points. I thought that their defense was really, really good at some points in the season, and then you look at some other games. I think I look at the Mississippi State game for Missouri, and I look at their defense, and they didn't perform that well. But overall, I think Missouri is definitely a team that you could see compete with a team like Florida this season. You could see them compete with Kentucky. I think Missouri, Kentucky, again, not a game that when you see that on your SEC helmet schedule is going to stand out to you, but that is definitely going to be a more competitive game than, let's say, I think this season it's going to be a more competitive game than Alabama, Florida, maybe, something like that. That's going to be an underrated game. Let's talk about my Gamecocks. Let's even throw in my Gamecocks, because if you don't know, I am a big South Carolina Gamecocks fan. Shane Beamer coming into his first season at South Carolina, and I am optimistic, over the moon, not in the sense that I think this is a national championship contending team, but over the moon in the sense that I really love the trajectory that this team is going. I think the quarterback position, we got a really interesting thing going on right now. I still think Luke Doty is the guy, but maybe look for Jason Brown. I think our receiving core, from what I was thinking in December to what I'm thinking now after spring ball and everything like that, has improved. I really like the improvements that I've seen from Dak Joyner. I look at the tight end position, EJ Jenkins, big transfer from St. Francis. I'm excited to see what he has to bring to the table. I look at the running back position. You look at Marshawn Lloyd, Kevin Harris, and as Zaquandre White, who showed major improvements in the spring game. I'm really, really excited to see what this new South Carolina offense has to bring to 2021. The defensive side of the ball, I think we have definitely an underrated D-line. You look at guys like Jordan Birch, Zach Pickens, Jordan Stretchin. You look at guys like Kinsley Enikbari leading the SEC in sacks last season. I think we got real talent on that D-line. The problem is going to be that secondary, which I turn to a guy like Cam Smith. I think he's coming in as a sophomore. He's either a sophomore or a junior coming into this season, but I think the world of him. I think he's going to have a huge season, but it's kind of the guys around him, and that secondary is going to be where the questions are for South Carolina. If our offense can be as successful as I think many Gamecock fans are hoping that it would be this season, I think maybe you at least see us competing for that third spot. I'm not saying that we're going to be competing with that second spot, because I think Florida is that second place team right now. I think Missouri and Kentucky are also competing to that. But let's say South Carolina knocks off Kentucky at home. Let's say South Carolina goes on the road and beats Mizzou. Let's say South Carolina takes care of Tennessee and Vanderbilt and all those teams, and then they play a competitive game against Florida. I think South Carolina will be up in that second half again for the SEC East 110%. It all depends, in my opinion, on how this secondary plays this season and how many points we can put up on the board offensively each and every game, because that's kind of been our problem the last couple seasons. Our defense hasn't been terrible. I just think that our offense needs to put up way more points than what we do. Tennessee even. Let's talk about Tennessee and Josh Heupel going into his first season at Tennessee, because this is definitely one of the more intriguing teams going into this season. You look at the quarterback position, there are 4 guys all competing for that starting role. You look at Hendon Hooker, Harrison Bailey, Brian Maurer, and then Joe Milton from Michigan. I have no clue. From what I saw from after spring ball practice, I'm really, really high on Harrison Bailey taking over that. But even Joe Milton from Michigan and Hendon Hooker, I think, are also very, very, very much in the mix. And that will be definitely one of the more intriguing quarterback battles that we have all season out of any college team. But let's say Josh Heupel is the answer at Tennessee. I still think Tennessee has loads of talent, even though they lose some big-name guys like Eric Gray. They lose Henry To'oTo'o. They lose Wanya Morris, guys like that. Even though they lose talent like that, I still think that this Tennessee team is stacked with talent all across the board. And maybe even Tennessee is one of the weaker teams this year. Let's say that they start on a roll, go 3-0 to start out the season or something like that. Even 2-1, let's say that they do drop the pick game. I still think if they make that game competitive, there's still some definitely signs of improvement for this Tennessee team, and maybe they go on and improve as the season goes on and starts to make competitive games with a team like Florida. They go to Florida this season. I'm not saying that they're going to beat Florida, but let's say they just play competitive against Florida. I thought that they even played competitive in parts last season against Florida. Let's say that they play a really competitive game against Georgia. Let's say they play a really competitive game against Kentucky. I still think Tennessee, although it is unlikely, I still think Tennessee could be a very, very good football program from what people think they will this season. So second place, I think there are tons of good teams to compete for this. I'm still obviously taking Florida as my number one to be that second place team in the SEC East. I'd then probably go Missouri, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then still have Vanderbilt at the bottom of the division. So that's just an early look, in my opinion, at what we're looking at in the SEC East this season and really zeroing in on that second place team.